provincial regional reform. And before we get to councillors, we actually have 3 delegations registered. And I'll call up the first delegate, and that is Jan Dai. You're up first.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. It's been a while since I've spoken from this podium. I think it's the first time for this council. Is that true? Don't know? Yes? No? Fair? Yeah. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm here to really talk about the governance review that's going on here. What did I press this out there? So, what do we value? We all value in our community, we all value innovation, we value barn raising, and to make those things happen, we all want a supportive government, a supportive governance system that's really going to help make that all work. So as part of being innovative, I always like to start with a thought experiment when we're doing something new and different. So I say, for a thought experiment, let's amalgamate all the startup incubators and the small business centers. They all do the same thing, right? They help businesses get going. Certainly a single leadership team would be far more effective than the 12, 15, 20 of them we have around the region now. Not only that, it'd be far easier for an applicant to just put in one application instead of 2, 3, 4, or 5 or 6. Surely it's got to be far more easier for that. And then think about the single voice to all the angel investors and government funders. Of course, it'd be much easier for them to figure out where all the innovation is happening. So why don't we just do it? It's a no-brainer, right? Well, I can hear all the snickers already from all of you and from everybody in the community. Jan, it's a bit of an ecosystem there. You don't have all the facts. You don't know how complicated it really is. They all cooperate with each other. It's an ecosystem. We all work together really, really well. And you know what? You're right. Absolutely you're right. And what else is right? It's much less responsive to the diverse needs of all those individual type of companies who find their own niche in terms of where they have to go. A big centralized organization would be much more monolithic. It'd be much more bureaucratic, much slower to respond to the quick and evolving changes that we have here. Big organizations, fewer checks and fewer balances. And you're going to get a concentration of the power in a few hands. That creates problems. So amalgamating them all, it's going to stifle innovation. It's going to stifle barn raising. We all want to make sure that that doesn't happen. In municipal government, it's as complex as all those ecosystems are. It's an extremely diverse set of services, must work as a big, large economic unit, yet it must be responsive to all those different needs of all the members around the community around us, around everybody. And it's got to do that as cost efficiently and sustainably as anybody else. And we all know it's much easier to innovate and be cost effective and nimble on your feet when you are small. And what are some of those examples we see about that? Well, we see that all over our municipal government here. A lot of the cities, they learn to copy from each other's successes and veer away from some of their failures. There's all kinds of partnerships and collaborations going on between all levels of government and even outside to the school boards and to the universities to make things much more effective. As a city, we have to respond to a regional growth plan. We have to comply to it. We can work together within a local context with a global or region-wide type of direction and vision. And that happens. And here are just some of the examples of the history that we have. It's a long list. I think many of you are familiar with this list. GIS, RepNet, emergency planning, tourism, economic development. I remember when I was back in council, year 2004, 2005 timeframe, we were dealing with some of the issues around the Rim Park financing fiasco. We reached out to Kitchener and set up the Joint Initiatives Task Force, which found savings as well, which are continuing as we move forward today. Cooperate, it's in our best interest as municipalities to cooperate, to fundamentally drive costs down, because that's better for everybody. And then I think about our barn raising mentality. You know, the barn raisers, the Mennonites, they all have their individual farms. They all have their individual businesses. They all compete against each other. But do they really need to amalgamate in order to raise a barn, to be counted, to create or promote a band? Of course they don't amalgamate that, because you don't need that to get your voice heard at different levels of government. We often hear that our current system's got too many politicians. We only have 4 full-time politicians. Dave, you happen to be one of them, right? There's a chair and the 3 city mayors. Everybody else is part-time. They're active in the community. Many access to government, if people get access and find out, hey, this is my point of view. We hear all those. And I'd rather have 52 part-time politicians who aren't dependent on that next paycheck for their job, because it's their career, to represent me. Those are the people who are listening to us. So I would say all those voices, that fosters innovation and that fosters barn raising. So what's best for Waterloo Region? Well, what does the data say? So these are just the Canadian Institute, the C.D. Howe Institute, the Monk School for Global Affairs, Montreal Economic Institute, Fraser Institute. Those are big, reputable studies who've done thorough studies around the world based on the impact of amalgamation. And they all say amalgamation does not produce a more efficient municipality, both from a governance perspective and from a cost perspective. And there are institutes in the United States who say the same thing. There are institutes in Australia who say the same thing. There are European institutes who say the same thing. It's what's out there. It's what the rules are. And why is it? Why is that from an economic perspective? You say, except for some of the big ticket items like public transit, waste management, and water and wastewater, the economies of scale tap out at about 250,000 people. So after 200,000, 50,000 people, it becomes more expensive to provide the same service because you got the bureaucracies and the processes you need to be able to manage that. That is all very well established through all of these research studies. So you got Kitchener, maybe an ideal size of a municipality. Kitchener and Cambridge is the same thing. They're very efficient municipalities to run on their own, and they have a natural incentive to work together as they move forward here. So, overall, two-tier has been working extremely well. Before we do anything, and this is the message we have to try to get out, what's the fundamental problem that really needs to be solved? We talk about things, well, we should talk to too many people to get something done. Is that a governance issue or a diversity of opinion issue? Make sure we understand what those differences really are. And let's evaluate the alternatives and not run into the quick idea of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. That sometimes happens. Sometimes you forget we have a small problem here, but 98% of everything else is working really, really well. Let's make sure that a solution doesn't upset the rest of what the system is supposed to do. And then we determine our course of action. And we've proven time and time again that we can do this really, really, really well. So as we move forward, do I know what the fundamental answer is? No. Do I have some ideas where perhaps you can have a little bit more regional cooperation? Yes. But overall, is the system working well? Yes. Is amalgamation the answer? No. But what we can all do is continue to foster our sense of communication and cooperation. Make sure our method gets heard, and that we go back and see what those studies are saying and say, this is what the fundamental reasons really are, why we should not be going to a single-tier system. So that's my presentation. Thank you all for holding this today.
Thank you very much, Jan, for your presentation, and thank you for your prior service at this horseshoe. Questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you. Delegate number 2, Greg Mikolenko. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you. My name's Greg Mikolenko. I live on Menno Street in downtown Waterloo. I've had, now retired, I'm 74. I taught environmental studies at the University of Waterloo. At one time or another, I spent 10 years on the Ecological and Environmental Advisory Committee of the region. I'm a current member of the Community Garden Council for the region. I served 2 years in the Tree and Forestry Advisory Committee to the Birdwatchers Clubs, the Grand River Environmental Network, and so forth. So what I came to appreciate through all this is that wonderful stuff happens right down at the individual or local level, and there's important work in setting policy and programs from up above and knowing how to work with the different levels and to get people cooperating. I think we've done a really good job in the city of Waterloo and in the region. And I think this is a very timely motion, so I thank you for clearly and in something that you could even go on Twitter with almost. Wrong glasses. Okay, the problems with the review. I think it's too hurried to be comprehensive and insightful. It's too focused on short-term costs, what they call efficiencies, and includes no opportunities for interactive community engagement. They do have what they call an online forum, but that means you plug in some words in a box and you don't know where it goes or who's going to have any meaning attached to it. You need to have, for community involvements, some engagement where you get people interacting. So if you see a need, I think keep that in mind, and we'll be helping you out. I believe the two-tier model does a good job in achieving long-range goals, in setting regulations, and running programs that accomplish their objectives. Things are generally sorted out at appropriate scale and in the best way. The motion reflects this very well. A few comments on the motion. As mentioned in the third phrase, experience elsewhere as well as analytical studies show that amalgamation rarely saves money and it reduces opportunities to profit from citizen engagement. Make sure that you cite the documents and studies that support this so that they can go into the record, and that becomes an important tool, or some people would call it a weapon, to forcibly get these good ideas home. Also, if possible, include an appendix that provides more information about the 2010 plebiscite. This might not come in from any other quarter to the regional review or to the provincial government. So I suggest a good thing to do. On the matter of efficient service delivery, 3 words that are in the motion, I'm very weary of provincial accusations about red tape. Most of this is unfounded. I would rather label our regulations and directives as safety belts or life preservers. They keep us safe, and they make us very happy at reasonable cost. I think also, in regard to this matter called efficiencies, I think an alternative focus is recognizing expenditures as investments with enduring long-range payback. We need to distinguish between costs and investments. And some of our finest achievements payback prospects. But the long-term view has shown that there are handsome long-term Robinson for 20 years in research in water conservation, and that brought in all these small things of efficient toilet, city with the corporation and so forth. And the result has been that the region has reduced per capita consumption by 50%. It took 20 years, 30 years almost, but we did it. And the payback is a saving of $1.5 billion because we don't have to build a pipeline to Lake Erie. Now that doesn't show up in a provincial review that only looks at current, very limited and detailed costs. And you save tons of money for the I urge you to take one suggestion where it says service delivery. Not only save money, but you meet a target, you satisfy needs, and I think that would be helpful. Fostering civil engagement and collaboration, I'm glad you mentioned that because you do that well. There's enough delivery relies on building well-crafted institutions that can capture creative, visionary ideas, produce good policies, design effective programs, and deliver them on a sustainable basis. So this isn't just numbers we talk about, it's the qualitative thing. The other thing is that there are places where ideas can come from many different quarters. One important one was the the idea of the curbside blue blocks. Rudolph. He convinced the Kitchener City Council to do a pilot project. Then when there was a meeting of a consultation by the region for a new facility, which they thought of just as being a new landfill out in New Hamburg, a teenager that was opened at this well-conducted consultation said, hey, why are we just talking about a landfill? We live in this neighborhood in Kitchener. We've got this lovely Blue Box program. Everybody, the kids are responsive. I've heard some of my fellow students taunting another one. Well, get your parents. We ended up with, in the region, of having the first waste management system, high quality conservation measure, the Blue Program, which then spread to Ontario. So we saved the province lots of money and lots of municipalities through a good example. So, services desired by constituents through an accountable and transparent. Thank you so much for doing it. One thing that's looming in the future is the climate change crisis, and we only have 12 years to avoid the planetary disaster. In Ontario, the government is the first that is trying to shoot the elephant itself, right? And this climate change crisis can't avoid taking action. Will have to be at the municipal level. We have no other choice. So please take some bold initiatives and start planning right now. And I urge you to frankly communicate this to the Provincial Review Committee. I'd like to end with one little example of what I think was one of the nicest examples of the big happy jumble of wonderful things that can result from the interplay of politics and participation in this community. I had a student when I was teaching environmental studies who was a single mom on welfare, living in subsidized housing up in Keatsway, built by this city. Her toddler was only 3 years old. She was hopelessly busy, having to go by bus long day back to school and so on. There's a park across from her social housing complex, Keatsway Woods. And it was being rather torn to pieces by the young boys from the development running around. She also saw at the same time that little girls had nowhere to go, nothing to do. So she asked me, as her semester project, could she form the Keatsway Woods Kids Club and put things to rights? I said, I think maybe you can do it. So she formed that. They had a special opening day, and I went out to it. Everyone was there. CKCO was broadcasting from a booth. About 8 different pizza companies were delivering free pizzas. The city of Waterloo trucks rolled up with tons, literally, of mulch and tools and showed the kids how to get busy and with the wheelbarrows. And the girls were included. This was really novel. And it was a splendid day, all told. And I think that showed that we had regional policies on various matters. The city stepped to it. The private sector joined in. And a feminist perspective built things for the future in a way that we're only learning to recognize now about gender equality. So I think you really are governing for the people. My wife says that I'm a bit of the people, so I could say that. And you're progressive. I think you show what conservative really means. And I'd like to end by saying we can't afford to be like ostriches that have dug our heads into the sand and ignore these big matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for your past service and your professional and personal stories here today, and your suggestions that we'll add if this passes, which I will send into the government, as well as the suggestion of adding effective and efficient service delivery into the final resolution. And do you have any questions from Council? Council Vasek, please.
Through you, Chair. I don't have a question, but I'm just very touched by your examples of everyday people and how small government is one way to really bolster everyday people. So I'm just very touched and wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, our last speaker for today is Kevin Thomason. And I know, Kevin, when you gave this presentation, it's the same one from the region. I think you did it in 6.5 minutes. So technically you have 5 minutes, but I'll give you 6.5.
No problem. We'll see. It's not as tall as the other guys. There we go. Honorable Mayor, members of council, and guests. My name is Kevin Thomason, and I am the owner of 1115 Cedar Grove Road, Waterloo. For years, I've volunteered with a wide variety of concerned community groups and worked with citizens, such as these 3 past mayors of Waterloo, who I helped draft this open letter back in 2010, clearly rejecting amalgamation. There's a copy on the screen there before you. Quite simply, most amalgamations don't work and have been shown time and time again to result in significantly higher costs, less representation, and bloated, less responsive bureaucracies. They seldom achieve the expected efficiencies or cost savings, and many amalgamated municipalities end up investigating ways to de-amalgamate after learning that bigger isn't always better. The City of Waterloo and the City of Kitchener have consistently rejected amalgamation since 1857 when it was first proposed. Amalgamation was most recently rejected resoundingly in a 2-to-1 ratio by the citizens of Waterloo in 2010 and has been rejected by every other municipality in Waterloo region at various points in time. Don't even talk to anyone in Cambridge about amalgamation. They're still reeling from 1973. The reason why amalgamations are so consistently rejected is because we're unique communities, separate cities with very different neighborhoods and ambitions, priorities and approaches. Each official plan demonstrates how much our goals, challenges, budgeting, and decision-making processes differ. I urge you to sit through a Wellesley Township Council meeting and contrast it to a City of Waterloo or Cambridge Council meeting. The rural Mennonite issues they give so much time to differ greatly from the rapid transit, university, or high-tech issues grappled with at these urban councils. We already have very successful custom governance solutions tailored to the needs of each neighborhood and community. According to the Harvard Business Review, between 70 to 90% of all corporate mergers and acquisitions fail. Any CEO knows that alignment is essential, and companies need to share common strategies, goals, and ambitions if a merger is to succeed. However, our communities have very different goals and ambitions. Some want to grow, some want to stay just the way they are. The City of Waterloo has an official environmental first model that has taken extraordinary steps over the years to protect vast tracts of natural area, even repealing our urban boundary, while other area municipalities have prioritized development instead. The people around this horseshoe know just how much our approaches and priorities can differ. If leading companies run by the most highest compensated experts can't even be successful 70 to 90% of the time with far more resources, what makes us think that we can be more successful than we already are under a rushed review by Doug Ford, who is determined to cut staff, budgets, and resources at every possible opportunity? Is it absurd that you've had so little time or opportunity for dialogue with Ken Sealing and others leading the provincial review? We currently have an incredible array of councillors from all walks of life representing our communities and neighborhoods. Yet, with only 4 full-time municipal politicians in the entire region, and so many councillors putting in almost full-time hours for low compensation, we're going to be hard-pressed to find a more effective and economical solution. Why would we want to get rid of so many hard-working people, but for just a few, likely more expensive councillors who will struggle to have the same broad impact? As other amalgamated cities have discovered, people tend to participate less in larger cities. Volunteer rates decline, there are fewer neighborhood initiatives, such as local arts and cultural events, fewer sporting activities and teams, as well as often the loss of local newspapers when there's no longer a local municipal government to report on. Being left with only one big single regional newspaper isn't likely going to be as good as the diversity of community papers we currently enjoy. Finally, amalgamation isn't necessary. Many of the most successful cities in the world are actually clusters of communities. Silicon Valley is comprised of 40 different municipalities. London, England, where I was this past weekend, is made up of 33 different boroughs, and judging by the number of cranes and the amount of new construction I saw, it is thriving. And Boston is a staggering 282 municipalities. While some may say we need amalgamation to make a bigger impact globally, it actually appears that almost all the cities consistently rated amongst the best in the world are actually diverse clusters of communities working together. In conclusion, why would anyone want to pay more for fewer services, less representation, diminished democracy, and reduced control while facing a significant loss of community and identity, along with the staggering odds that things aren't going to work out nearly as well as expected? We are already the envy of the world. Our community structure isn't a problem to be solved. Our diverse community of communities working together are a large part of the reason for our success. Please pass this motion against amalgamation and send a strong message to the province. Thank you.
Wow, Kevin, you left time on the table here. It was a good one. You're getting faster and faster.
Knew I could do it.
Yeah. Excellent. Questions for Mr. Thomason? Seeing none, thank you very much, and thank you for your well laid out proposal, and thank you for your service to the community. You did very well with Bill 66. Let's see what we can do with this.
Well, let's hope, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Keep up the great work here too.
Thank you. There are no further delegates here today, so I'll look for somebody to speak to the motion. Councillor Henry?
Happy to move the motion with the recommended amendments that the mayor spoke to moments ago.
Yep.
I'll speak after I get a seconder.
Second by Councillor Hanmer.
Happy to second it with the changes.
Okay. Let's start around. So Councillor Henry first.
Mayor, thank you for taking the time to put this motion on the table, as well as using the notice of motion process correctly as it was intended. It's allowed us to attract community members to provide their input and expertise to this council. I couldn't have done a better job in either of the three ways that each of them chose to attack this problem, and I won't go back over their comments. And Mayor, it's also given you the opportunity to speak to residents directly through local media on a number of occasions by having put this notice of motion out ahead of today. I think what's really important to understand about how this process that the province is undertaking differs from every past review of municipal governments. Every past review of municipal governments. Never have so many been reviewed with so little direction in such a short time period. In typical reviews, there are a couple of years that go by because studies are commissioned, data is gathered, people are consulted with, ideas are generated, those are put back to communities that then review those, offer up their input, their further suggestions, which then some experts sit down with and provide recommendations, which will be publicly available, that we can pursue, and that the minister ultimately can make some decisions about. That's the normal process. We have no idea if we will ever see a single word of what the review commissioners here have to recommend about us or any other municipalities. There is no indication any of that information will ever be volunteered to the public before the minister makes their decision. And certainly there's been no back and forth around what the issues are, what the possible solutions are, what the data supporting those suggestions are being gathered to have an opportunity to be put to anyone to interrogate those results and understand what makes sense here. This is not a sensible approach trying to tackle the region of Waterloo. We have every day heard the challenges that our community faces from a variety of different perspectives. And our system and our collaborative orientation and our culture allows us to talk about those together and come up with solutions that work for us. Comes from the places we come from, the traditions we have come to believe and espouse and live every single day, and put those into action. 9 years ago in that referendum that we last fought off, the proponents of bigger government, they proposed that the big challenge was not actually how much money we were spending. Wait, we got on with it and did it. Together, 8 local governments created the Waterloo Economic Development Corporation. They even let it be called the Waterloo Economic Development Corporation because that spoke best to the world. And it's worked. We are thriving municipalities. We collaborate and work well together. And the fundamental issue that I heard from the perennial proponents of amalgamation, 8 years something, we worked together, we built consensus. Smart growth, climate change. Sees not just the opportunities of the 21st century, but allow us to resolve the challenges that we face too. That's why I'm happy to trust that the government will support and collaborative municipal governments, and not try to
in the end can actually, in fact, cost more money. And as the great examples where we are working to be more effective and efficient. And so the only people I've heard from, the theories have actually been debunked, that this doesn't really save money. And then another just nice example is someone reached out to me. The Moses Springer is currently under construction, and I'm a new counselor. This has been in the works for a long time. I decided to have a community conversation so people could come out and ask me questions about it, and this was spearheaded by a resident just asking, could we do something? We want some more information. So I said, yeah, sure, let's have a community conversation. And staff have already done more than they've needed to do in terms of consultation with the community and information out to the community. But I just let them know I was doing this. If they'd like to show up, great. If not, no problem. But that I would probably follow up with questions after this because I would not have most of the answers, especially being a new counselor. So staff came out to the event, brought the boards, spent an hour going back and forth in a conversation with residents. Some were quite frustrated, some were just curious, but I thought this was an amazing example of how we can work together at this really close level. And the next day, someone sent me an email saying, this is the reason why amalgamation shouldn't happen. That we have this access to you and that staff are coming out, going above and beyond is why I would say amalgamation shouldn't happen. So I'd say that I also will support this motion and I'm glad to.
Thank you, Councillor Vasek, and highlighting all the grassroots initiatives. Councillor Veith?
Through you, Chair, or Mayor Jaworski, thank you. I'm happy to support this motion as well. I think right now we have a lot of as 8 communities, there's a lot of like friendly competition. We work together. There's a lot of collaboration as well. And here's one kind of example of, I've sat on the sign variance committee for many years as city council, and you know, companies usually come to us and they want bigger, they want, you know, all lit up signs. And so we have a made in Waterloo sign variance policy, right? We often use the example, I hate to say this, but Hespeler Road. I mean, we don't want our city to look like Hespeler Road does. So we're very particular about how big signs are, if they're lit or not, and when they're lit and not. And those kind of things to me are really important. And I think it's important to the citizens of Waterloo. When I was campaigning, no one talked to me about amalgamation. And when I was campaigning in 2010, we know where that went. Back then I had no one. People were adamant that we keep our identity as the city of Waterloo. I mean, I could come up with more examples as well, but I think this is great. Thank you, Mayor, for bringing this to us and allowing us the opportunity to go on record. So thank you. Happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Veith. I do think that people forget that our individual bylaws and zoning represent the values of our citizens, and that's why we embed them there. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. Through you. Amalgamation does not save money. Amalgamation does not save money. Maybe I'll repeat it again. Amalgamation does not save money. But I think we have to say this over and over and over again, and maybe I will quote from the Fraser Institute, not usually one to quote from the Fraser Institute, but this is their report on municipal amalgamation in Ontario from May 2015. Considerable evidence that the province believed municipal restructuring would result in cost savings. Even in the face of stiff local opposition, provincial officials maintained that amalgamation would be more efficient and produce tangible benefits in lower taxes and less bureaucracy, and we have found that those intended benefits never materialized. It is this central argument. It's the economies of scale and tax savings argument that is repeated over and over again, and it's been borne out by many people, liberal, conservative, whatever political spectrum you're on, that this is not a truthful argument. So beyond that, myself, I'm concerned about the silo effect of what happens in an amalgamated Waterloo region. We see that a little bit in Cambridge with their amalgamation, where they're still, like decades later, if Preston has something, Galt must have something. If Galt has something, Hespeler must have something. And I would hate to eliminate the collaborative approach that the region of Waterloo has to approaching things and replace it with, well, they have it, so we must have it. So that's a big concern for me. And I appreciate Mayor Jaworski putting this forward, because for me personally, I have a hard time talking about this with community members, because at some level it feels a little bit self-serving as a city councilor up here. For me especially, you know, when I decided to run, the very first thing that I did was I looked at everybody's financial statements from the last election. And to run for city council is feasible for a nobody like me, a nobody in the community, to say, I'm going to give it a shot and I'm going to try. That's a feasible thing. And I think that leads to, I hate to be saying this as one of only 2 councillors here, that's a straight white male, but I think it actually leads to diversity of thought. And I think if you look at who sits on city council and compare that to who sits on regional council, it is borne out. Regional council, aside from our mayors, has 6 males and 2 females from the 3 main cities. And if you look at the makeup of the city councils in those 3 cities, there are 13 female councillors and out of 25. And I think that's one of the big reasons. And if we're looking at a larger community where tens of thousands of dollars need to be spent to run for council, I think that would become worse. And I'm going to go back to that Fraser Institute report for one second and talk about something when they looked at the Kawartha Lakes amalgamation. The province's consolidation agenda made it clear that some type of restructuring would likely occur within the region. And we hear that still today. We hear talk about how we can't sit still and we need to adapt. And frankly, the opposite of that is change for change's sake. And I think that's what we're looking at today. And what is working within the region here and change it just for change's sake. So I will be supporting this motion as well, and thank you, Mayor Jaworski, for putting it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Councillor Bodley. Just kidding. Councillor Freeman, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you for bringing forth this motion. I think that more broadly, the citizens of Waterloo value the city of Waterloo taking a very public face in terms of response to this work, and I certainly support the motion. In addition to some of the things that have already been said, one of the things that I've often had conversation with folks over where it relates to a change in governance, there tends to be a focus on how it would affect the tax base, which evidently is clear. It results in higher taxes. But more broadly, I'm always trying to get people to unpack for me what they would like to see in terms of high-level goals. What's missing? What's the missing piece that you think can be achieved through a change in governance? And it's really interesting because when they start to unpack it, they realize that that whenever they have an issue, they call their local councillor. And then we navigate that space. So from the perspective of an individual, they really only still make one phone call or one email. It tends to come to us. And that notion of saying that all politics is local is really true. Even, I don't know, how many around this table get emails for provincial issues? How many get emails for federal issues? I've been asked when the 401 will be fixed. And mind you, I found the answer on the MTO website. I mean, maybe we're just good at finding these things after a while. But I think that's true, and I think people really value the ability to stop us in the grocery store, to call us at home, to stop when they're out walking the dog and knock on the door. And I think that Jan raised something that's really important, and that is that there's really only 4 full-time elected politicians in this whole region, and all the rest work part-time. And because they work part-time, or we work part-time, it does give us that opportunity to connect with people in our places of business when we're out doing other work. And it also allows us, I think, to take strong leadership roles on local boards of directors. Imagine if there was just a very small handful of people that had to share time on the symphony board, the hospital board, all of them, like all of the different committees and such that we commit time to as councillors. If all of a sudden there's only a very small handful of individuals and they're expected to do all of that, there's seriously not enough hours in the day. And I think, honestly, that having a voice at the table and sitting at those boards brings a larger value to the community. So in addition to all the things you've listed here, Mayor, I think that a lot of people do see the work that we do, but that this motion gives us an opportunity to talk about it more. Wonderful. And our goal is to actually get people to give their thoughts. There's still a week left to give their thoughts to the provincial government. You know, I have pages and pages of items of why amalgamation just can't work. But really, your neighbor can be your counselor today. And I think that's what's so important, that gives us the big city amenities that we fought for and all the small town feel that people love. As I think I mentioned before, nobody ever when I was knock on door said, gee, I wish I lived in the city the size of Mississauga. No offense to Mississauga, but you know, nobody ever said that. And I think what really scares me is there's a lot of stories about amalgamation online of 20 years later of a story of a city in Canada that was amalgamated, and the mayor said, like a lot of 20 gaining in maturity, yet there's still some growing up left to do. 20 years later, can you imagine if the mayor of our place in 2042 still has to say that we're still trying to figure things out?
Like, when we're the number 2 growing municipality already in Canada, that'd be a shameful waste of time. And speaking of which, $170 million or $189 million to amalgamate Ottawa, I think if we had that kind of money, we'd be working on real issues like climate change, climate crisis, climate adaptation, opioid crisis, many different things that were on our affordable housing, many different things on our list of things to do that that just aren't on the minds of citizens. Citizens want cost-effective governments and great service, and we saw in the quality of service or quality of citizen satisfaction survey, the quality of life indicator, 99%, 88% for good value, and then the City of Kitchener just released their study today. 83% of their citizens think that the 2-tier structure gives them good value, so it seems to be consistent across the board. So with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to you all for presenting here today. Very informative. I think we probably have a list of top 25 things of why the 2-tier structure works today. I'll now entertain a motion to go into closed session. Councillor Veith, Councillor Hanmer, all those in favor? Okay, we're off to closed session. Thank you.